Welcome back to the news. Italian oil multinational Eni has signed off on a $7 billion investment in a project to export natural gas from Mozambique. The country's president, Philip Nyusi, and Eni CEO Claudio De Calzi attended a ceremony in the capital Maputo on Thursday to formally approve the Coral South liquefied natural gas project. Once built, the floating LNG plant, with a capacity of nearly 3.4 million tonnes a year, will draw gas from the Rovuma Basin, where Eni first made its major Mozambique find in 2011. The investment decision gives momentum to resource development in Mozambique, which has been struggling with a debt crisis after failing to make an interest payment on a Eurobond in January, making it the first African nation to default in 6 years.
It's a great day today.
It's a great day today. It's the first of our gas projects in Moz. We really are breaking the ice for a big future.
Mozambicans have just witnessed the launch of an infrastructure project for our economy, which will surely have a positive impact on our lives.
For Mozambique, this is significant because at a time when it's going through a financial crisis, it shows that there are investors still have confidence in the country, and it also shows that its gas reserves are going to get developed. At the moment around the world, because of the low oil prices, there are a lot of oil and gas assets that aren't reaching FID and aren't going into production.
South Africa's unemployment rose to its highest in 14 years in the first quarter of 2017 as agriculture and informal sectors shed jobs and more people stopped looking for work. The unemployment rate climbed to 27.7% of the labour force, the highest since September 2003 and up 1.2% from the last quarter of 2016. The data released on Thursday by the Statistics South Africa showed unemployment, which includes people who have stopped looking for work, rose to 9.3 million people out of a total workforce of 22.4 million. South Africa's economy shrank 0.3% in the last quarter of 2016. If it shows a contraction when domestic product results are released on Tuesday next week, the continent's most industrialized economy will be technically in a recession. There has been widespread international criticism of President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw the US from the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Mr. Trump said after his announcement that he was prepared to discuss a new deal, but key signatories to the accord have ruled that out. In a statement, Mr. Trump said that the deal punished the US and would cost millions of American jobs. On the continent, Ghana's former President John Mahama said that the move was a very sad day for global cooperation. The Paris Agreement commits the US and 187 other countries to keep rising global temperatures well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels and endeavour to limit them even more to 1.5 degrees.
The United States contribution to global warming is around about 20%. If you integrate over history, it's been a lot greater than that, and that's the argument for why they should take deeper action now and sooner than developing countries. So in the long term, if there were a failure in the globally collective actions to reduce climate change, the impacts on South Africa and the United States of America would be extraordinarily severe.
Now, a new report called the African Economic Outlook, co-authored by the African Development Bank, has found that the quality of life across the African continent is improving in various ways. Voxafrica's Naomi Samaru breaks it down for us in this next report. Let's take a look.
For decades, negative perceptions and representations of Africa have circulated around the world. The most misleading narrative is that Africa is poor. And although the continent has around 1.2 billion people living in poverty, many of Africa's 54 nations have made major progress in the last 25 years when it comes to improving the general well-being of African citizens. According to the African Economic Outlook report, at least 1/3 of African countries have now achieved medium to high levels of human development. The Human Development Index measures the level of progress in health, education and living standards from 1990 to 2015. The North African region has the highest level of human development on the continent and is rapidly approaching the world average. The report also reveals that multidimensional poverty has dropped in 30 out of 35 African countries. Oxford University's Poverty and Human Development Initiative describes multidimensional poverty as several factors that constitute poor people's experience of deprivation, such as lack of education, lack of income, poor health, inadequate living standards, disempowerment, low quality of work, and threat from violence. Rwanda scores the highest for making the most progress in its fight against poverty in 2005, followed by Ghana, Liberia, Comoros, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. As of 2010, around 86% of the Rwandan population was covered by the country's community-based health insurance. One of the largest public health insurance schemes in sub-Saharan Africa, introduced by the government in 2003 following the Rwandan Civil War in 1994, to increase the access to healthcare services and reduce the burden of healthcare costs, especially for the poor. In terms of education, the Central African region had the lowest school completion rates for girls on the continent. However, the gap between girls and boys is increasingly narrowing. Nearly 3 times as many girls finished secondary school education in 2014 than a decade prior. South Africa, Ghana, Morocco, Mozambique, and Tunisia are reported to have invested above 6% of its GDP in education. Gender equality is also on the rise. Countries such as Botswana, Mauritius, Rwanda, Namibia, and South Africa have the lowest levels of gender inequality. Women achieve up to 96% of men's human development, which means that men and women have the same rights and opportunities across all sectors of society. Whilst many African governments have made efforts to reform its policies to transform the state of education, health and living standards, the continent as a whole still faces significant challenges in its fight against poverty. Although the share of people living in poverty is falling, around 54% of the population in 46 countries, a total of 544 million people still remain multidimensionally poor. One of the main reasons is that many countries are still affected by war. And recently, the United Nations warned that tens of millions of people in Somalia, South Sudan, and the northeastern part of Nigeria are on the brink of famine and in need of food aid.
We are raising our alarm level further by today warning that the risk of mass deaths from starvation among populations in the Horn of Africa, in Yemen and Nigeria, is growing. This warning is in light of the drought situations that you've been hearing about that are also affecting many neighbouring countries, and a funding shortfall that has become so severe. In all, some 20 million people in these countries are in areas affected by drought. 4.2 million of them are refugees. Consecutive harvests have failed. Conflict in South Sudan, coupled with drought, is leading to famine and outflows of refugees. Insecurity in Somalia is leading to rising internal displacement, and rates of malnutrition are high, especially among children and lactating mothers.
Other challenges that the continent faces is that the poor suffer disproportionately from the burden of ill health. And as a result, major investments in healthcare are needed. The World Health Organization recently elected Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus from Ethiopia as the first African Director General of the agency. In his first speech, he spoke about the importance of healthcare in Africa.
People identifying health as a rights issue. Wherever you go, that's true. And what the world has promised in 1948, Health for All, when WHO was instituted, is true today. But still half of our population doesn't have access to health care, universal health coverage. Not only in 1948, in Almata 1978, we have also recommitted, and now in 2015 with SDGs, another commitment. I think it's time to walk our talk, and the whole world is asking for that. All roads should lead to universal health coverage, and it should be the center of gravity of our movement. And when you say universal health coverage, it's addressing the financial barrier. It's addressing the challenges we're facing with regard to access to drugs, addressing the barriers to quality, access to quality of care and diagnosis.
Also, over 645 million people in sub-Saharan Africa live without electricity. Half of the continent's young people are unemployed, and gender inequality is still very much prevalent in the Central African Republic, Chad, and in Niger. As a result, women's development is 24% lower than men. Yes, it's true. Africa has a long way to go, but let's not forget the tremendous positive changes it has made in the last 25 years to lift up its people and to offer them a better quality of life. Africa still remains the wealthiest continent in the world in terms of natural resources, and its people deserve to thrive socially and economically.
Nigeria's Lagos state was originally a collection of islands home to around 1 million people, but now, at 50 years old, it's the biggest city in sub-Saharan Africa. Let's take a look in this report.
Skyscrapers and street vendors. This is Lagos, Nigeria's megacity, home to 20 million people. It's the fastest growing city in Africa, but its rapid growth has created what many call an urban jungle. Ayo Asef is an architect who dreams of cleaning it up.
It's not modernity in the sense of creating malls. No, it's just about making it safe and making it hygienic and again, making it accessible. So it becomes a more pleasant experience to come here and bargain.
With a population rising by on average 900 people per day, building and infrastructure projects are struggling to keep up. Ambitious construction projects like Eco Atlantic are even reclaiming land from the sea. But this demographic explosion has created divisions. The better off are housed in the new parts of the city, and the poorest are consigned to slums by the lagoon that the authorities threaten to demolish at any moment.
The threat of being evicted, the threat of being chased away overnight has grabbed people to the extent that they cannot even walk, operate or do anything in this area. People were arrested regularly on a regular basis.
A settlement on these islands has been here since the 14th century. The Portuguese gave Lagos its name, which means lakes. But its rapid growth over the last 50 years has turned this peaceful port into one of the biggest and busiest megacities in the world.
Some sport now, and Nigeria's Ahmed Musa scored twice when Kelechi Iheanacho added a third as the team romped to a 3-0 win over Togo in a friendly international on Thursday. All the goals came before the half-hour mark, with Leicester City striker Musa taking his goal tally to 13 for the Super Eagles after 3 minutes, having been set up by Alex Iwobi, who provided the same service in the 17th minute. Manchester City forward Iheanacho added a third goal in the 28th minute. Both countries were warming up for their Africa Nations Cup qualifiers later this month. Nigeria will host South Africa in Uyo State on June the 9th, while Togo will play Algeria a day later. Now, before we go, let's have a reminder of tonight's top stories. 15 children in South Sudan die following a poorly executed measles vaccination campaign. A double suicide bomb attack at a Cameroonian refugee camp kills 4. And a strike in northern Morocco enters its second day as protests in the region continue. Well, that's all from the evening news team tonight. We'll be back on Monday. Have a lovely weekend and we'll see you then. Good night.